Dillon was also sued for $236,728.08 in a second unpaid rent lawsuit. Amy Duggar's husband, Dillon King, was sued for failing to pay rent on his Springdale, Arkansas restaurant Wellington's, which is now closed, in January 2024. On January 2, 2025, a judgment was entered against Dillon in the amount of $156,909.96 and was signed off by the Arkansas judge on the case. The judgment also ordered Dillon to describe all of his property, both real and personal, including monies, bank accounts, rights, and credits, within 45 days of the order. The U.S. Sun can exclusively reveal landlord Hillcrest Holdings, LLC is demanding Dillon be jailed for going against the judge's ruling by not making a payment towards the judgment. On March 12, the plaintiff in the case, Hillcrest Holdings, LLC, filed a motion for contempt citation and for sanctions. The court papers claimed, on January 2, 2025, the court entered its consent judgment against Dillon King in the amount of $156,909.96. King has not paid the consent judgment or any part of it, choosing, instead, to put the plaintiff to the arduous and expensive task of trying to figure out how to collect from him. The documents continued. Also on January 2, 2025, the plaintiff filed its notice of deposition directing King to appear for a deposition on February 11, 2025, and to bring the documents listed therein with him to the deposition. On February 7, 2025, the court entered an agreed order whereby it ordered and directed King to produce the documents set forth in the plaintiff's notice of deposition by no later than February 11, 2025. More than 45 days have elapsed since the entry of the consent judgment. King has failed to comply with the court's consent judgment in that the schedule of property he filed on February 14, 2025, does not list all of his assets. The plaintiff claimed Dillon has willfully and intentionally frustrated and delayed the plaintiff's efforts to collect the consent judgment by failing and refusing to comply with this court's prior orders and the plaintiff's notice of deposition and subpoena. The landlord then asked for Dillon to be jailed, as the court documents read. The court should impose appropriate sanctions against King, including, but not limited to, incarcerating him in the Washington County Jail until he has complied with this court's prior orders and the notice of deposition and subpoena. Before the plaintiff's request for him to be held in contempt, Dillon has been fighting the consent judgment. On January 29, Dillon filed a motion to quash, which means to void a court order or proceeding. In the court papers, he objected to a deposition and a subpoena for production of documents and information, claiming it is irrelevant and unnecessary. A hearing for the motion for contempt citation and for sanctions will take place on May 6, 2025. Unpaid rent LAWS. The U.S. Sun previously reported that landlord Hillcrest Holdings, LLC sued Winston Holdings, LLC, Aka Wellington's, Dillon, and two business partners for unpaid rent for the Springdale, Arkansas location. In August 2018, the plaintiff and defendants entered into a lease agreement to rent the property from September 2018 to December 2023. In July 2023, Dillon and his business partners allegedly vacated the premises, which constitutes as a default of the lease and a material breach of contract. The court papers continue to claim Winston Holdings, LLC failed to make the required monthly rent payments to the plaintiff as required by the lease after June 2023, and its failure to make said payments constitutes a default of the lease and a material breach of contract. In February 2024, the defendants responded to the lawsuit by denying the allegations and claimed, defendants only admit they ceased making payments after plaintiff refused to communicate after several good faith attempts. They requested the complaint be dismissed. Dillon admitted in court papers that certain payments were not made to the plaintiff, but failure for such payments to be tendered were after good faith attempts were made to pay and to communicate with the plaintiff. It is denied that a material breach occurred. A consent judgment, which is a settlement agreement, was then filed on January 2, 2025 in the amount of $156,909.96. Section de la Suite. This lawsuit came just months before Dillon, Winston Holdings, LLC, and his two business partners were sued for unpaid rent of the Wellington's location in Rogers, Arkansas on April 2, 2024. The U.S. Sun previously reported from court papers, tenant has failed to pay minimum rent in full each month. Tenant has since made rental payments but has not paid all unpaid rent. Since the final notice of default, tenant has paid the following amounts towards its balance: $23,239.92 on January 25, 2024, $10,000 on February 15, 2024, and $10,000 on March 5, 2024.